You're listening to the Confident Creative Podcast. I'm your host, Carrie Gavin, former professional photographer turned professional encourager. I'm an intuitive life and business mentor focused on strengthening courage and confidence for heart-centered creatives. These heart-centered creatives desire to make an impact and an income through sharing their heart with the world. This podcast is dedicated to helping us creatives activate more courage within ourselves so we can experience more memories, achieve more milestones, and make more money. In addition to empowering stories, this show will also include practical, actionable strategies from thought leaders, influencers, impact makers, and my own personal experience. If you are passionate about the areas of intentionally living, prioritizing passion, choosing courage, as well as some soulful business strategy, spirituality, and some self-mastery, you, my friend, are in the right place. You ready to play? Hey, friends. So excited to share this conversation with you. This is something I have been looking forward to for a very long time. This conversation is with the one and only David Neagle, and this is a mentor from afar for me that I have studied his stuff for so long. I don't even know how many years it's been, but he has had such a profound impact because he really has such a simplistic and real life way of interpreting the universal principles and the way that the universe works and really practical, actionable strategies. I, of course, geek out over his work because it is all the transformational work and really using your mind to create a life that you really love and recognizing how the fundamental principles of the universe work and really just speaking in a way that you can understand and really get your teeth into the practical side of things that feel sometimes elusive. Sometimes these concepts feel like really heady and you can't really quite get them grounded into your body. But David's podcast, the Successful Mind podcast, is something I listen to religiously. I highly recommend it. His programs and his workshops, they're all just really incredible work, and highly, highly recommend following him and getting in on all the things he shares with the world. So here is a little bio about David, so you have a little bit of context. A lot of times I get right into the heart of the matter with my interview guests, and I give a little context before so that you know some of the things that we're referring to, but I often don't like to waste time of the interview with the sort of backstory. So without further ado, in 1989, David Neagle was pulled deep into the gates of a dam that broke his back and nearly drowned him. No one expected him to survive the accident. Entire boats had been sucked into this dam with no survivors. So what happened next was that David, a high school dropout and dock worker, awakened to the potential previously untapped within him. He made a decision that day to begin the journey of being responsible for changing his life, and now changing the lives of thousands of others. David Neagle knows how to help you activate and achieve whatever dreams your heart desires, no matter where you're starting from. After his brush with death, David began to study his own potential, and in the 12 months following his accident, despite being unable to walk for more than a month, he tripled his income. So David really did some work to dive into figuring out how he actually started to create these changes. And it wasn't until he read The Science of Getting Rich by Wallace Wattles that he fully understood the transformation. So when David does his work, it's both partly from his own experience and all of the information he's learned over the years. So David's thinking and his attitude that got the ball rolling to create his unstoppable success comes from all of these things playing together. David Neagle is the best-selling author of The Millions Within, and he is known as one of the architects of the coaching and personal growth industry, having worked alongside other well-known mentors like Bob Proctor, Marianne Morrissey, Tony Robbins, and the like for decades. This interview is so fun. It's so exciting to hear David's perspective on navigating his own fears and figuring out the next best step for himself, and how all of those things, in looking back in hindsight, show him those breadcrumbs were all leading to the same place, but really choosing his courage and choosing his confidence to show up for himself and do the work so that he can help others do the same. This was such a fun interview. All of his information is in the show notes. please go along and follow him. I know that he will have an impact on you as well. So now let's get to the interview. Hey, my friends. I am so excited for this conversation to introduce you to the one and only David Neagle, who has been a mentor of mine from afar for the last 3+ years, which he doesn't know about. I often have your book, Millions Within, in my car, wherever I am.
Love
my
it.
Kids know your podcast, Successful Mind podcast. They're like, oh, this is David? Yeah, we want to listen. Yeah, they love it. So I'm super excited. I have been a longtime follower, a big time fan, and love sharing the work with the world. So thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So the place that I would love to start is a lot of the listeners and people in my community are creatives, right? And although I think we're all creative, so there's that. But so many of our creatives struggle with this confidence and courage and really navigating the currents of fear, right? So what I would love is, instead of the sort of traditional origin story where podcasts, bring us up to speed, we'll get to that. But I would love to know, is there a time you remember when you were really starting and doing the work you were meant to do in the world, when you were making that jump? Was there anything for you that you remember being like, okay, I have to be brave and do this thing? Or was it just like, it naturally felt like the next step for you?
Well, I think it's a little of both. I think that there were things that naturally felt like the next step, but I was also scared out of my mind. Yeah. So here's probably the biggest one. And it's probably the one that if I did not overcome this, I probably would have quit. So when I was a kid, I talked a lot. It was very natural to me.
Yep.
Yet at some point, people started saying you talk too much, and they started making fun of me, right? So I slowly started to stop talking. And it got to the point where it wasn't that I didn't know how to talk, but in a social situation, I just would just clam up. I would just shut up.
Yep.
And when I started to go down the first path in my entrepreneurial experience, I would say, I realized I was going to have to talk to people, and I couldn't. I could not. I would like, if I was to meet you in a gas station or something, I wouldn't know how to start a conversation. I would just freeze up. So I recognized that, and I'm like, okay, how do I fix this? And what I did was I forced myself to have conversations with everybody that came in contact with through the day, and beyond just general pleasantries that you would say, how's your day? How you doing? Nice to meet you, that thing.
Sure.
So if I went into a gas station to get something and you were behind the counter, I would say, hey, how you doing? How long have you worked here? Do you like it? I would really try to push a conversation. And I would push a conversation in a direction of things that I knew that I would need to talk about if I was selling, if I was negotiating, if I was looking to get business anywhere, basically talking about the kinds of things that you would talk about in self-improvement, basically. Yep. So I forced myself to do that for a year, and every day, like it was an everyday discipline, and I broke out of it in a relatively short period of time. So I remember walking into a gas station, paying for gas or for whatever reason I was there, and not being able to say anything and having to force myself through the fear of doing it. And then like literally getting in the car and my heart's beating out of my chest. I can't think of the next thing to ask, right? Like your brain seizes up.
Totally.
And if I hadn't done that, there's no way that I would be where I am, because I wouldn't be able to talk. And that's probably my biggest tool that I have, is that I talk. So
totally.
It would have stopped before it started.
Yeah. And I'm curious to know, do you remember, like, how did you get that awareness that like, okay, I have to start talking if this is what I'm going to do?
Well, so I joined a network marketing company while I was working for a petroleum company, and you had to go out and you had to recruit people. So It was, I don't remember how many people it was a week I was supposed to talk to, but, and actually talk to them, see if you could get them in a conversation about where's your life going? I have another opportunity that might be different, that type of thing. And I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, there's no way I'll ever build this business if I can't do this. So I'm like, okay, what needs to change if I'm going to do this? And that's what it was. I needed it. So it was just, so instead of forcing myself within the conversation of going out and like cold calling on people, it was everyday conversations. So every person that I met, I forced myself to think in the situation and ask them questions that would be pertinent to if I was actually soliciting you for a network marketing company, right?
Totally.
Do you like what you do? How long have you been here? Is this your goal in life? What are the problems that you're facing? Why are you staying here if you don't like it? All that kind of stuff.
That's awesome.
I just forced myself to have conversations with everybody that way. And what was interesting, what I found was more interesting than what I learned about how to get comfortable with the speaking was I was shocked at the answers that people would give me. Like they would open up to me like people, I never met them before at all. They're selling me a pack of cigarettes or something. And they would just open up in this huge conversation with me. And I learned a lot about people, and I learned a lot about what people would tell you if you would just sincerely ask, and if you were friendly, and how to be friendly and how to get people to open up. So yeah, it all started there. And that was, like I said, if I had not got past that fear, I would not be where I am. The road would have stopped right there. That would have been the end of it. So I recognized that was the next thing that was keeping me from my goals at the time. So that's what I did.
That's awesome. Yeah. And it's so funny because I think it's one of those things where like when we're forced up against doing a thing that we're uncomfortable, and the greater thing that we get out of it, it's like, that's how we identify those breadcrumbs looking back, but looking forward, it's so hard to see your way, right? It seems like I just have to talk, but talking really led you in this greater
Absolutely.
capacity. I think it's amazing. And I know that I'm curious. I know that you worked with Bob Proctor and he was your mentor forever. Was that through that network marketing company? Because
that's
before,
how I met him. Yeah,
really?
a company called Neagle. It was very big in the mid 90s. And I got involved in there around, 96 or something. That's when I met Bob.
Yep.
I started going to his stuff in the mid 90s primarily for that company because he was doing a lot of training in that company. His wife was a Royal Diamond distributor in that company.
Wow.
She was the fastest Royal Diamond in the history of the company at the time.
Holy cow.
Yeah. And then I decided that he was going to be my mentor. And along the way through his teachings, I also realized that network marketing was not the be all end all for me. It was just the gateway that led me into meeting the people that I needed to take me further down my journey, so then it was 4 years later, it was probably 3.5 years later, 3 years, that he had his very first training for facilitators to teach his material. And I was in the first group of facilitators that he recruited for his seminars. So that was in the end of 1999, I think. And then, so I started that. I started my own business, and then I started working with him and running my own business. And we had a company together where we spoke and we taught and we did seminars. And so I was with Bob till around 2004. So it was a good long time that he was my coach and my mentor. Learned a lot from him. My life would never be the way that it is now if it wasn't for him.
Yeah. Yeah. I always was like, I wonder how that even came to be, because I know, I've loved Bob's stuff too, but I remember when I first found you, I was like, there's something in the way that you communicated that just landed a little bit differently for me. And I was like, this is crazy. And I was always curious to see like how that connection came to be. And the other thing that I was curious about is you talk a lot, especially in your podcast. And I love hearing how you really speak to integrating the work that you were learning with him. And this is something that I hear from my clients, and I'm sure you do too. But when you have something that you conceptually know, right? And this is sort of hypothetical, but when you sort of know something, or you understand something, it's different than knowing it, right?
Yeah.
So when you were working with Bob, I guess that's where it would have started, is how do you make the jump to actually integrating that?
By doing it. By doing the work. Doing the work, making the corrections, getting the correct result, and then doing it again. Over and over again in a short period of time. There can't be big lapses of time in between, or you reinforce the doubt, worry, and the fear. So the second biggest fear that I had, and probably still to this day, the biggest fear that I had to overcome was walking away from the security of my job to start what I was doing. And I had no experience doing it other than the recruiting that I was doing in the network marketing company. And I was doing little Saturday trainings and stuff I would do for people, that were in my downline. But I had never done anything to the scale of that I was stepping into doing, where it was my entire business and all my money was coming from there. And I had to soup the nuts. I had to find people, put butts in seats, sell them into coaching, like the whole thing.
Crazy.
So I had to learn a lot in a very short period of time. And I figured that I was just going to jump into all of it. I wasn't going to resist anything that I had to learn, and I was going to immediately do it so that I didn't have a chance to talk myself out of it. So literally, the weekend that I was being trained to teach my very first seminar, that was Bob's seminar, at night, I would go up to my hotel room at the end of training, and I would sell people into my first seminar. So I had a list of people to call. So I sold 25 people into my first seminar, $495 each.
Wow.
And I did it I did it within a month after leaving my training. I put on that 3-day seminar.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think
if I didn't, I would not have enough momentum in every area to continue forward. It was just, I was scared out of my mind. Like, I had $5,000 left to my name. I invested everything in being able to do that. I paid off as many big bills as that I had, but I was married. I had 4 children. I had a car. I had a dog, a cat, the whole 9 yards.
Yep.
And I had to be responsible for all of that. So it was I'm going to either do this 100% or I'm not going to do it. And I had a very, very serious come to Jesus conversations with myself. Like, you cannot afford to not show up every day at work and give your best. Because, like when you're working for somebody else, you don't always show up 100%, right?
Totally.
I mean, it's true.
Yeah.
When you work for yourself, you can't do that.
Yeah.
So I worked 7 days a week for the first 7 years I was in business.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't take a day off.
No. And I think that's sort of there's this like sold the beauty of like laptop lifestyle and all these things, right? Mm-hmm. And if you're really committed, you quickly realize that's not what this is, right? Yeah. And so I learned that I was a teacher. I was a first grade teacher, and then, which is why I love hearing Brandon and Steph talk, because I'm like, I know, I did the same thing. Yeah. And I left that when my son was born, and I started my own photography business, and I had that for 14 years. And I mean, the transition through just battling what everybody else thought was safe, and you have a master's, and how come you're not going to keep doing this? And then I found myself divorced with a 2 and 4-year-old with a creative business, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And it was that, like, you have to show up. You can't not show up for this. And all those fears come up, and all, like, navigating all of that stuff is non-negotiable if you're going to make this work and stay in the room. And so for me, that's how coaching ended up coming to be, because I had other creatives coming to me saying, like, how did you do this? And I'm like, it has nothing to do with your craft. It's all like, what are you thinking, and what do you believe, and what's possible, and those things. So I'm curious, much like you, I was always a talker. Now it's like a running joke with my parents that they're like, you get paid to talk because you never shut up. So that's what you do. Right. But I'm curious, like, when you sort of, back to your origin story now, when you were working on the dock and you were, miserable and hating everything, and you had that moment where you were like, I'm just going to change my attitude, and I'm going to treat people with respect, and those little pivots, do you feel like that was like the seed for, I'm just going to continue to keep getting better, and that awareness started to become this like awakened part of you? Or was it just like, I just can't take any more, so something has to change, and I'm willing to stay in the room no matter what?
It was both, but it was probably more the latter of what you said at that moment, because I was exhausted. That was after I had my accident, and I was in a state of magical thinking around that accident. I thought God was going to drop something into my life because I didn't die. And, that's just magical, superstitious thinking, but that's where I was in my growth. I did, when everybody tells you something, especially if you're not really 100% conscious at the time, you have a tendency to believe it. And I had a tremendous amount of people, and people in authority, coming up to me and saying, how did you survive that accident? Nobody survives going through there. when I got sucked through the dam.
Yep.
And I didn't know. And so when they told me that only one other person had survived that they were aware of, and that guy was a quadriplegic or something, I was like, what the fuck? Like, how, why did I survive this? Why did I survive? And I thought, okay, well, there must be a bigger plan for my life if I survive this, right? So I'm putting all these religious ideas that I grew up with together in my head, and I started to believe them. And
I have a question, not to interrupt you, I have a question.
Yeah.
So when you started to have that, like, there must have been a greater sense of purpose for me because I'm here, right? Was that conditioning from other people, or did you really feel like,
I really felt it.
You really did?
I really felt it. I felt it my whole life, except I was always told that I was a dreamer. And my dad was a bit of a dreamer. I don't think he ever fulfilled his dreams to the way he wanted to, but he sure did give it a hell of a shot. Like, he was an entrepreneur. He owned several companies. But it was also one of the things that my mother looked down on him for. They got divorced when I was like 13. So, but she would always complain and degrade him because he spent large chunks of money to be able to start this business or whatever. And I was raised with, oh, he's a dreamer, he's not a stable guy type thing, right? Yeah. Yet my dad always provided for us, so it may not have been a lot, but he fulfilled that responsibility. So he definitely had his principles. Now, I was also a dreamer. I knew I was going to do something big. I didn't know what it was, but then it started to get into my head, like, maybe that's not real. Maybe I'm being irresponsible by dreaming. Maybe I should go to work. And to be honest with you, I tried my initial thing, changing my attitude, treating people with respect, was me trying to get my shit together.
Yep.
Right?
Totally.
And really do it the way they say you're supposed to do it and see what happens,
Right. Yeah.
I was fortunate enough to have such a huge, that had such a huge effect in my reality that it kept me a little bit out there in the magical thinking, like, what the hell happened? My income tripled. That was not supposed to happen. Something else is going on here. So then I began to, like, okay, I need to figure this out, find out what's real, what's magical thinking. What am I really supposed to do? Do I really have a purpose? And then I got to the point where it was like, okay, if I do, I'm never going to know unless I put myself out there 100%. And I remember getting a fight with somebody about this. It was in my personal life. And they were like, what if you fuck it up? What if you make a mistake and we lose everything? And I'm like, then it's my mistake. Then I'll know. But I can't go the rest of my life not knowing. It's like having a kid on Christmas and never letting him open the presents under the tree. They never know what the hell's in there, Totally. So I had to do it. And I knew that I could rely on myself. And then I come to find out, like, I remember Tony Robbins took you through an exercise. I don't know if he still does, but years ago, he would take you through an exercise where he would show you how you have always been winning all of your life. You have these little micro wins, things that you did, but you never chalked it up to your potential. It was always either somebody else was involved, or it was God, or like you associated it with something else. And I realized I had basically been an entrepreneur all my life. Like, I started out a lot like Vaynerchuk did. Like, I had the lemonade stands. And I was competitive with it. My grandmother was Italian, so I'm like, how do we crush the kid across the street, right? She would make me Italian cookies, and I would sell those, and people would come over to my lemonade stand. And then I wouldn't have one paper route. I had two paper routes. And then I had three paper routes at the same time. So I was also kind of an extremist personality. I had to do more than everybody else was doing. Totally. I'm not real proud of this one, but I did. I sold pot, and when I was a teenager, we sold some drugs here and there for a while. We used to flip cars. There was a lot of different things that we dabbled in. Some were okay, some were not okay. But and then even when I was an adult, I had multiple jobs. I went out and bought an old Chevy Blazer with a plow, and I used to plow snow when I would come home from work on the weekends in the wintertime in Chicago. Yep. So always had my hand in, how can I make a few extra bucks? And I think that allowed me to do a couple things. I became very comfortable with money, with people. That was all my life. Even though I was raised not comfortable with money, I never really had an issue with it. And the other thing was that I learned how to talk to people. And I learned how to ask for what I wanted. I learned how to, strike little deals here and there. So I became comfortable doing that. And all of that, then when I actually went out and really did it legitimate, like bigger business, I found out that I was actually very good at it. And that was with a company, that was with a petroleum company. Like that company probably would not have done the things that they did in the time that I was there had I not done them, because I broke all the rules that the owner didn't want to do.
Yep.
And we had I didn't land this account, but I think that I was crucial in making this account as big as it turned out to be, which was with Union Pacific Railroad. I saw all this opportunity with the railroad that nobody had tapped into, and it turned into a multi-million-dollar account for us that we eventually lost because the owner had to sabotage everything. And that's also what made me want to leave. I realized there was no future. That nice family, but they just didn't have any vision.
Sure.
So, but I learned how to do all these things and work with these people and work with some really tough people, because I was working with unions. Yeah. I was working with railroad guys, trucking guys, like real tough personalities. So when I started off in this industry, in the self-improvement industry, I focused on sales and making more money for entrepreneurs, but I also worked with salesmen. So I would just walk into State Farm Insurance, Metropolitan Life, Prudential Insurance. I would walk into, where else would I go? So it was the insurance companies that I would go to, and there was someplace else I used to go a lot. I can't remember what it is now. Any place that they had a good sales team. And in those days, those guys were rough. I mean, those were really rough salesmen. I mean, those were people that, like, a lot of them were around when I was a kid, and they would do what they called penny policies and nickel policies. Yeah. They would knock on doors, So these were guys that knew their stuff. There was no like shading it for them.
Yeah.
They were very serious. If you could show them something, great. If you couldn't, it was get the hell out of there, because these people knew what they were doing.
And were you teaching them things like universal principles and this is how we sell?
Yeah.
Not directly?
I was, but not probably with the verbiage that I am today. So it was a little bit more masked. I kind of went the Earl Nightingale route. Like, you know who Earl Nightingale was? So if you listen to his original Lead the Field program, which was his first corporate program, all the laws are in that program. He just has them disguised.
Yep.
Otherwise, like, you couldn't talk about spirit in corporation.
No.
But I had listened, like, I grew up with listening Lead the Field in my learning years. So I knew the terminology that he used. So I would use the same terminology with these people and it would work. I had to be careful not to get too woo-woo with them, or they would laugh your ass right out of the conference room. So, but yeah, basically that's the way that that's how I started off. And I learned really fast, go for somebody who's already successful. Bob taught me this actually, but I kind of inherently knew it. He said, when you go to a company and work for them, pick the people that are already successful, because those are the ones that, if there's any value in what you do, they can take it and magnify it. He said, the losers will never do that.
Yep.
And I learned that real quick. So I started going with top people, and I would triple, quadruple their income. And because they would do it, they could see the value in it. They knew how to make what I was showing them dance.
Yeah.
And then it would blow up, because then other people would be like, okay, what is this guy doing? And that led me, like, one of my very first wins was I helped the top 7 Prudential real estate agents in the country up their income. Huge. So I was working, I forget, it was President Council. I forget what they called them. But I was working with just the top agents in the real estate companies and insurance companies. But
wow.
Yeah.
And then how did you make your shift into serving more entrepreneurs and being more sort of purpose-driven?
So I started off with insurance agents, real estate agents, and network marketing companies.
Yeah.
The insurance agents and the real estate agents were very tough to get. They were good to work with because they were satisfactory to work with because they did the work, but they were very tough to get. And you're constantly, I don't know about now, but then you were constantly combating this idea of the agent didn't see their own worth and they didn't want to pay for any self-improvement, and the broker was not going to foot the bill. They wanted them to be half vested. So it was a constant shit show back and forth.
Yeah.
Network marketing was much easier to sell. Now, I would do the same thing with them. I would go to the top of the food chain in network marketing, help them become really successful. They would think that it was like magic, what I would show them. And then they would throw their whole downline into one of my seminars. And so it was like,
That's
it was
awesome.
making money hand over fist, but there was no satisfaction because most of the people who wanted coaching wanted something magic. And I would give them a really tough sales training that they had to go through. And it was basically designed to get them past their fear of rejection, because that was their biggest first problem. Yes. 90% of them would pay me $15,000 to go through the training and never show up.
Oh my gosh.
Because they had to talk to 100 people in 7 days.
Wow.
Right?
That's fascinating.
Yeah. And they literally not show up, and there was no refund on it. And after a while I was like, I'm not doing this. This is
no impact. It doesn't feel good.
It's not, I'm not here just to make money. I'm here to make a difference.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, who's more vested? Entrepreneurs. Well, that was the time when the internet started. So it was after the dot bomb in 2000. We got past 9/11. So that whole thing, I got past all that. And then the internet started picking up, and you were having more entrepreneurs online. So I started going after them.
Yep.
And that was a huge market. And then that opened it up to the entrepreneurs that we deal with today in all different kinds of areas and professionals. Yep. So one thing led to another, but it was making a conscious choice to break away from network marketing. I literally had to stop speaking at their conferences, tell them, no, I'm not doing this anymore. And I went just after entrepreneurs or small business owners.
And isn't it so funny with those sort of crossroads, right? Where we have this invitation of like, this is no longer fulfilling. It's been working, right? And I feel like for a lot of us, we get stuck in this like, well, just because it works, like, do I need to pivot? But when that fulfillment isn't there, right? Especially as creatives, like it just gets so strong in my experience anyway. It's like, you can't not do it. So you really have to have the courage to say like, I'm out, right? That's what I did with my photography business after 14 years. I was like, I love it. It's amazing and great. And this is the next level, right? And I think that having cultivated those experiences for yourself and giving yourself the evidence that like, yes, you can pivot and it's going to be fine. That's why that fulfillment really comes through so much more with the people you work with now and all these things, whatever. But you talked a little bit about resistance before, and in one of your recent episodes, I was listening and you were talking with Brandon about when you come up against something that's stuck or you're not moving, you ask yourself, what are you resisting?
Right.
I'm curious, is that something that that seems to me like it's a level of awareness, right? So if you're resisting something, I guess my question is, how do you know what you're resisting?
So first of all, the answer is always here, and the universe doesn't hold anything back from us. So if we're not bringing the answer in, at some point we're resisting something. So when we're resisting something, you're evaluating something from the point of view of a lie. Something in your evaluation process is not true. And the idea is you have to ask yourself, what are you specifically resisting being, doing, or having that would allow you to move forward in your life? And if you look at it from that perspective, you usually can see it right away.
That's awesome. This is like one of my favorite conversations that you always have. And I love the way that you explain it. And I think that it's so resonant because so many of us come up against these fears, especially around money and receiving and what are we worth and what are we charging and all of those things. And so we have to strengthen that muscle of awareness and resistance. And I love the way that you explain it. I think it's so powerful. Also on that lens is the law of polarity. I love the way that you explain exactly that it's still here and we just have to shift what we're focusing on, what we're looking at, and the answers are always here. So I love it.
Well, there's also, the other thing about, so with both of those actually, so with resistance, one of the things that I'll do is I'll say, what is the problem? I'll ask a person, what is the problem that they're having trouble with? You can never help somebody work through this with a hypothetical situation, because in a hypothetical situation, we can make our mind do tricks that don't work in reality, right?
Yep.
So it can be like, well, what if this happens? And what if that happens? But that's not real. So if you actually do it with the real problem, the answer is always there. So what's the real problem? How is that problem showing up in your life? And then what is it that you're resisting doing about that problem that would allow you to navigate it much easier? And I've never had anybody not be able to answer it once you focus on what the real behavior or the thinking is that's around it. And with the law of polarity, whatever it is that you don't have must be here at the same time in the same place. And if it's a problem, the answer must be here in the same time and in the same place. But it doesn't mean you're ready to receive it.
Mm-hmm.
So Napoleon Hill pointed out in Think and Grow Rich, you're not ready to receive a thing unless you believe that you can acquire it. If you believe that you can acquire it, you'll be on the level of cause and effect for that result that you're looking for. You have to become the cause of the effect that you want to be able ready to receive the thing that's on the same plane. Because you can be ignorant to what that cause is, and you're on the same plane, but you don't get it. You can't receive it in your life. You can't bring it in. You can't recognize it consciously either. So it's important to know that.
100%. It's so good. It's so good. And I think it's at least for me, I remember listening like to your very first episode of the podcast and everything since. And what I love about the way, what first attracted me really to your way of teaching is it's relatable, your relatability, the way that it's like a no bullshit, like, yeah, this is all possible. And also it's hard, right? Like this is hard work if you don't have the right tools, right?
Right.
So especially serving, coaches, healers, helpers, creatives, artists, whatever, this fear can be so deep rooted that it sort of infects everything. So
completely.
One of the things that I see a lot, I'm sure you do too, is when people go through an experience and they all of a sudden don't trust themselves, right? So they have an experience, now they're afraid, they didn't get the result that they wanted. How do you suggest navigating that sort of fracture and then continuing to go on, right? Because we still have to keep going, and courage is something, and confidence is something we have to compound over time. Mm-hmm. But I see a lot of creatives end up applying all these meanings to things like I'm not meant for this, or I can't charge that, or whatever. So do you have any insight as to how to navigate that sort of crack?
The first thing is to get the person to be aware that the problem is that they don't trust themselves, and it's not that they don't trust the thing or the opportunity or the situation. The person has to be really aware that they've lost trust with themselves.
Totally.
Then they have to be aware that the way that they began to lose trust with themselves is by not following through on what they said that they would do. And they've done it so much that they don't trust themselves anymore. Like you tell your subconscious mind a lie long enough, it'll believe it. So now it's about evaluating where the person is with their own trust and then beginning to rebuild trust. So that means what I'll do with a client is we'll focus on what will they say that they're going to do that they know they'll follow through on. And we start there so that they're consciously aware that they're saying they're going to do this, and then they follow through on it on a regular basis. Yep. And then we'll increase it from there. At any moment, if they don't think they're going to do it, we back it down, because the whole idea is not that they get something done. It's that they rebuild trust they rewire it in their integrity.
Totally.
Again. And once you do that, like that is the biggest, strongest thing that you can do for yourself. Because if you know you'll follow through, if you know you won't quit for whatever reason, there's nothing you can't do.
Absolutely. And I think that that's something that's really the place that we have to strengthen the muscle the most is really our own integrity and showing up and doing what we said we're going to do. Right.
100%.
If I don't quit today, then I'm not going to quit. Right. It's just constantly doing it over and over. And the other place that I find people really struggle with is actually giving themselves permission to say what they desire and wanting that. Right. So I think it's a skill set that we have to learn, especially being an entrepreneur and telling ourselves the truth of what we want, what we desire. And for me, being heart-led is everything. It's like, that's what I think our biggest edge is. And I think that self-trust piece is what has to come first. Because if you don't trust yourself, then you're not going to actually tell yourself the truth and do the things, right?
Right.
So I'm curious, what is it that you feel like is your greatest desire in your work right now? Like, what is your legacy? What do you want to be known for in this experience, in this season?
Well, we're in a real season of expansion and growth now that my kids are grown. I don't have a responsibility to them anymore in the capacity that I did. So that was a very big thing for me for a long time. So now it's about how many people can we positively affect in the world over the next 30 years or so. And that's what we're focused on.
That's amazing. I love it. I'm like handedly responsible for hundreds of your subscribers, I think.
Thanks.
I think everyone should listen to it. It's great. And on the heels of that, where do you find your greatest sense of creativity?
In working. In working. So it's not like sitting on a beach somewhere or taking time off. It's while I'm working. I think that's where, I'm constantly in consuming mode and creating mode. Like it never stops. Even if I'm doing something when I'm not working, I'm learning from it. I'm really analyzing what am I experiencing, what's going on here. I'm trying to learn as much as I can. I learn a lot about as many other businesses as I can to see what could I use that would apply to me. How could I help someone else? What are potential ideas or opportunities all over the world? So it's never ending for me, but it's what I love to do. So that's where my mind is all the time. Yeah. And the thing is that it's funny because everywhere you go around the world, you'll find that the problems, if you break them down to the root, they're all the same. They're all the same issues. They're self-esteem issues. People are afraid. Their situation has become their God. They can't break out of it. They're trying to live up to their mother and father. Like it's all the same stuff everywhere you go.
Totally. And do you find the people that you serve are coming to you because like how do they know they want to do this work? How do they know they're ready for this work? Do you find that it's just where you and I were, where it was like, we're just sort of fed up with this and something has to change? Or...
I think it's situational in a person's life. I think they get to the point where they find out the bullshit that they were raised with does not work. And today people are finding that out sooner than they did like when I was a kid. It took a longer period of time to stop believing in the rhetoric that we were given. Now it happens much quicker. So now they start looking, and it's easier to find it. Like these messages, there was no internet or social media when I was a kid. So it was very difficult to find this information.
Yep.
I was telling somebody the other day, I'm like, you don't understand. When I started to become curious, I went to the library, right? I went to the library and I started picking up books. I didn't even know what books to read. So I started reading biographies, and the very first book the very first work that I came across was Earl Nightingale's. Yep. And I didn't even understand that. So, it wasn't like this stuff, positive messages are in your face every day because 10,000 people a minute are loading them on Instagram.
Totally.
They weren't there.
It's so funny. I know.
It was a very different world then.
Yeah. I was just saying to my kids, my son's 13 and my daughter's 11. And we were at the library the other day and I was like, I used to have to pull out the rack and go through the cards. And they were like, what are you talking about? I'm like, we didn't have Google. It's just not what we had,
And if you wanted to look something up from the past, you had to go in the microfiche,
yes,
and you had to run it across and newspaper articles and stuff. Yeah.
They were like, what? We have our town, we live north of Boston and we have a ton of antique stores in our town. And there was a rotary phone and they were like, what is that? I'm like, that's how we talked on the phone. Like, that's what we did. And they were like, what? I'm like, I know, it's crazy. It's crazy. Which reminds me, I was curious to know, with this new age, right? And all of this knowledge and wisdom and stuff that we have access to, how did that affect you parenting?
That's an interesting question because it was very different for my two younger children than it was for my two older children. So my two oldest kids and my two youngest kids are 10 years apart.
Okay.
My oldest daughter was born in 86. My son was born in 89. And then my other two daughters were born in 96 and 97. So there's a big distance there.
Yep.
The first two in their formidable years, I didn't know anything. I was a young dad. I was a young husband. I was a young person, making all kinds of mistakes, and I'm sure that had an effect on them. But I think they got a much better message because they would be about 10 years old when I started really getting engaged in changing my life around. So they had a pretty good impact from that. But really from a experiential way of living, my two youngest ones had the most because they were still really little kids when I became wealthy. So their whole life changed very rapidly at one point. Yep. My other two kids were about out of the house by the time that actually happened for me. Yep. So it was, I think that it's done great. They're all doing what they want to do. They're all successful in what they're doing. And, they're all getting on with their life. So, I've got one that is still figuring out what she likes, but I think that, even she's on a great road. Like she went after something that she thought she was in love with, found out that she didn't, was able to say, I don't like this, and totally turned and decided to go back to school and do something different. So
that's awesome.
They all seem to be doing really good.
That's awesome. Yeah. I think about it all the time and I'm like, man, on some level, I think there was always this curiosity. My dad actually introduced me to Joseph Campbell when I was like 11.
Oh, wow.
And I remember being like, I love this. Like, I didn't know what I was really learning or listening to or watching or whatever, but there was some resonance there for me. Through my, high school years and stuff, it was always in the back of my mind. But then when I really got into psychology and my degree and all that stuff, I was like, this makes so much more sense,
Right.
But I never had that luxury of really saying like, I just recorded another episode. And one of the things I said was it took me so long to say I am a photographer because that wasn't really the thing. Right. And I think it's such a beautiful example for your kids where they get to say like, I'm going to try this out and it's not for me. And I think that's really what we want for our kids and for all of us really. Right. I often say I'm in the business of permission and reminders, myself included, right? Just
for sure.
Permission to do it, reminders that we can do what we want. So, which is awesome. So I want to wrap it up real quick. And the last question that I have for you that I ask all my guests is, what does being a confident creative mean to you?
So you kind of got garbled there. Could you ask that again?
What does a confident creative mean to you? Being a confident creative?
Well, to me, it means that a person has the awareness to know that there's a message of some sort, or not just a message, but an authenticity in the message that's flowing through them. And they're confident enough to just trust it and put it out there. It's not right or wrong. It just is. But I think that there's a difference between somebody who's doing it in order to achieve a result versus somebody who's doing it steeped in their own authenticity. If there's one thing that I've learned about everybody that I've studied, the real successful people, when you look at their lives all the way through, are the ones that learn to accept themselves as they are. Mm-hmm. At whatever stage of growth that they were in, or whatever stage of trouble that they were in, and just be that. And there's creative genius in all of those individuals.
I love it. I couldn't agree more. It feels so fun and so creative and so spot on and really important for all of us to remember, like, this is the journey, right? This is what we do. So perfect. This has been an absolute pleasure and an honor. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me.
My pleasure.
And our community. And I will be sure to put all your things in the show notes, and let us know, is there a favorite place that people can find you and connect with you?
The Successful Mind Podcast.
I love it. Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to the Confident Creative Podcast. I am so psyched that I got to have this conversation, and I loved sharing it with you. If you enjoyed it, I would love for you to hit subscribe to the podcast, and it would mean the absolute world to me if you could go ahead and leave a review about what your biggest takeaway was. If you want to come over and continue the conversation, join us in my free Facebook community, the Confident Creative Collective. We'll be diving into all different conversations from the podcast, as well as some additional trainings and some inside scoop. If you want to find me on the interwebs, you can find me on Instagram at keri.gavin, KERI.GAVIN, or you can find me on Facebook. Thank you so much for being here. I so appreciate you, and thank you for sharing this with anyone you think it resonates with. See you on the next episode.